Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, which is taking on more character as we speak. The Core New Core. It's meant for them. It's meant for my patrons, of course. Patreon/Michael Miller Pilates. And it's meant for anyone seeking to survive and thrive as a Pilates instructor or a student, or student. But primarily these broadcasts are directed to help you survive as a Pilates instructor by just sharing the identification of two things. One biomechanical and one about Pilates. And the biomechanical is about core new tension, and the other is one view of Pilates out of as many people as they are that have a view of Pilates. Which makes the assumption that all we have are what we have as a view rather than some reality out there beyond what we see. It's such a catch-22. For as a human being, we have what we can experience and process internally, and out of that we try to stay alive and survive, is where this broadcast comes in, because it talks about Joseph Pilates as a survivor, and his training is survival training. Okay? He has a definition to his work, and he says how the work is done, and he gives the work itself, which is a sequence of exercises. But this is the Michael Miller trademark. That's why it's a Michael Miller trademark training video. All rights reserved kind of thing. But it is that trademark that a Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliate establishes a license to use. And so in my email campaign leading down to or up to the convention, 9:54 Friday, June 21st, Lost Gulch Overlook, or wherever you are, exhaling into it to inhale coming out of it, as though you could actually inhale into the coming out of the curve that I envision solstice to be, as what's going on in the movement of the planet. In any event, you're observing when that moment is, and a lot of other people that are a lot smarter than I am have been able to establish when that is. When that is. This is a spring that is a little unwieldy, but it's good and big for larger audiences. And it also, so this way, see what I'm saying? Or this way, between shoulders and hips. This way. So see how that goes, right? Is it this way, or is it this way? So we talked about core yesterday because that was the last email. And so that establishes the core as a grip. And where do you go from there? You go to more than one rotation, and the tension that can be made in opposition to one another. I think a friend of mine considers that isometric tension. And I don't know much about how that's defined. But what matters to me, that I want to matter to you, is that from yesterday, the core is a grip at the hips, and that's just a fact. This is not just some kind of squeeze or engagement. It's not a compression of a softball. It's not a Bartinioff, use only what you have to kind of thing. The human being can engage a grip at the hip from which it stabilizes off of throughout other endpoints of tension. So when you go from just having one, so here we are, one, just having a grip at the hips, the reason you're watching this is to see what I'm saying is that the ability in the human body to engage rotation in the opposite direction as the strength in the hips, that oppositional rotation between axes is the tension that I'm talking about when I say core new tension. The definition of core new tension is oppositional rotation between axes. And a very long time ago, I was just so much into the connection of the shoulders to the hips, and Cornu, the trademark, didn't even exist yet. And here in, Irene Dowd's book, Taking Root to Fly, Irene Dowd. I wonder if you can read that, or if it's backwards. Anyway, in there is a graphic. And in that graphic, there another axis of rotation clicked in for me that was part of where Cornu, the Michael Miller trademark, got its configuration. So for the longest time I'm drawing hips, shoulders, and ears and how they connect to one another. And again, I say, students reflect what you end up realizing that what you're pointing to. Because the student says, what about the knees and the ankles and the feet, the toes? Core new tension, the opposite changing of rotation, the oppositional rotation between axes. That's the definition. And that happens between metatarsals and ankles, ankles to knees, knees to hips, hips to shoulders, and shoulders to ears. Except a suggestion in how you present the evolution of core new tension within the human body is that, first of all, the body is a nautilus shell. I've got to get my shells out of storage. The ball is the hips, the core is a grip at the hips. The core is a grip at the hips. This manifestation of life is different than something that is not symmetrical, where a shell just rolls off in one direction. Perceiving the symmetry is what gives the rotational dynamic the most stability. So is it this way at the hips, or is it this way at the hips? This way or this way? I'm just pointing to what's there. And insofar as the arms, and when you rotate the arms, when you engage the shoulders to rotate in an opposite direction of this, you eventually discover the significance of the TVA. Remember that? We talked about fly TVA, the transverse abdominis. Because the transverse abdominis is the primary structure that I think of that connects the rotation of the shoulders going this way, pulling down the rib cage. The TVA connects into the whole rotation at the hips. Ribs to glutes, I think I used to call that. Ribs to glutes. Knuckles to neck. And people would show up at a workshop just to figure out what that meant. And yet, it's sensational in terms of whatever I was teaching to teach ribs to buttocks, and whatever I was teaching to teach knuckles to neck, usually pedipole. Anyway, thank you, Shell, and thank you for getting home again. None of this imagery existed when I came to Pilates, either in myself or when I came to Pilates. My interest in understanding what made Pilates Pilates, well, first of all, my pursuit of it, because when I got there, it was stomach in, use your buttocks, and use your inner thighs. Usually with a pointed finger, if not a prodded finger. Stomach, buttocks, inner thighs. Those things to make the core work, right? And so because I think of myself as lazy, just for an imagery, I picked the notion of rotation instead of arrows. So I got to my trademark, and I got to the point of identifying core new tension, because I tried to combine 3 arrows into one image. What can I think of as an image that will get me the result of stomach, buttocks, inner thighs? Which you want to be able to control the rotation at your hips. Top. So I can do this. Watch this. Watch this. I think I'm ready to demonstrate this stuff out of the toy talk. So I cannot get this to work. There's got to be 30 people in the bleachers, and these 2 5-year-olds that will be 5-year-olds, and so you either have their attention or you don't. And so there I am trying to say, okay, I can't get it to work. And they look at me puzzled, and I said, do you know how to make this work? And they go, yeah, you got to spin it. And so sure enough, when you spin it, it maintains the stability, right? I'm talking core new tension now. I'm talking oppositional rotation between axes. I'm talking about observing the world that we live in and the way it works. So this has a pan on the bottom of it. Okay? And if it works now, it draws a circle in one direction. So see what direction it's circling in, and when it hits, watch what happens. It goes the other way. I'm afraid of overwhelming the video feed, so let me minimize what's going on here. So there were the two lines that I drew, and there's the squiggly line that came from the spin, and then if you go to where it goes out, see, it comes out of that spin, and when it lands, it reverses and goes the other direction. Because I wanted to know, how do the shoulders connect to the hips? And my question there was, I'm taking a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I'm rolling it up where the rolls come toward one another. Is that how the shoulders can connect to the hips? This may seem trivial and inconsequential to me, but in sending the email today and talking about core new tension, and the definition being oppositional rotation between axes, this takes you somewhere new if you haven't been there, and if you have and didn't understand how this came to be, so I got to the hips from the laziness of mine and wanting to embrace 3 images by one thing. And I had a big poster of a cutaway of a nautilus shell. I had a huge poster that was a much better version of this when I started teaching at Ferrantino's, without understanding how much I was headed toward seeing the physics in it, identifying core new tension as biomechanical means to how the body moves through space. Okay. And so that's what made me back up, because from the hips, out of laziness, to the shoulders, because of physics and the top and the way it reverses itself, the way one rotation plays off of another. Now, see, I want pictures of, I need my toy box more. Hold on. The top got me to the connection here. And then Irene Dowd and her graphic, right there in an old pencil mark, is the words, another axis, exclamation point. And then students just said, fill it out down the rest, which the oppositional rotation between axes proved to be consistent. And so that's what takes you out of locked knees and pointed toes and looking more like Joe does in the picture of him in teaser, where he has an endpoint of tension at metatarsals. So my chain of notes went from, because this is about surviving as a Pilates instructor, and the second thing in the list of 5 to be a presenter of MMP is the statement that contrology develops the body uniformly. And so that whole thing about whole body, Pilates is a whole body thing. You know, if you really take that seriously, because of what you come to realize through an application of, or an engagement in core new tension, it takes you out of affectations that are a distraction or a distortion from the purity that is there in its own expression. Contrology develops the body uniformly, that's whole body to me, and whole body then comes to core new tension, which is the whole subject of the email today that has no explanation in it other than the definition. So if you're watching and you don't know this definition word for word, that's one of the 5 things to explain CT and MMP. And what makes this such a great point of view to share is that there is at least a claim. Maybe there's nothing to it, and maybe it's just huckster talk, but MMP, points to an ideal that you can feel, meaning as sensational. There's something in it that you're in the pursuit of, and whether or not you ever feel it or ever get to it is the issue of value, right? And so it's a matter of, well, who knows, see? And there's all that thinking going on, but for the Pilates, the MMP instructor, knowing that their trade is in being, thinking, and observing, and not much else beyond that, in my mind, matters, because it's in blending those, coordinating those in the 55 minutes that you have, that really is the epicenter of value, in my opinion. Why is that the epicenter of value? Because it's such an important thing to be as coordinated as you can be in your capacities. It doesn't help if one or more are absent or dysfunctional or abusive to the others. See? I just thought of a person as an athlete who they're so in their body to the point of, I'm not saying they all do right, should just stop while I'm ahead. I said what I had to say. So, core new tension in 2019 is new and mostly unheard of. And it may end that way, without any more effort into it, pointing to it than my own. Couldn't be happier and couldn't have spent a better life pointing to something that I think matters so much, and hopefully in some way shares some commonality to Joe about the passion with which he represented his work and the consistency over time in which he represented it. So in the 40 years of Joe's professional life, his mat, his documentation, his film, his book, the same as 40 years later, documented by him. Consistency of the sequence. And to me that says that he was aware of the importance of maintaining the consistency. So go on Amazon and buy my book, The Elements of Pilates and the Michael Miller View, on Amazon. Don't get it in paper and ink. And compare it, so from the year 2000 to now, 19 years later, and take heart, I hope, in the consistency of what I've been trying to identify for a long time. Well, I had the pleasure of trying to identify for a long time. And on today's day, where so often I'm talking about Pilates because of its ideal nature and how important that is to make a discernment between all the ways that there are to look at Pilates and all of the special interests that want it to be looked at a particular way, to what's real. See, what's real. To me, it might be new to you in terms of what core new tension is, or what I'm talking about at all, but it's a way of engaging your muscles so that your body is not so heavy. And the more uniformly you engage your musculature, the lighter you are in space, because more of your stuff is dynamically engaged. Okay, make sense? When you go after that as your primary objective, you know the difference between locked knees and pointed toes, and soft knees and endpoints at metatarsals. You know the difference between where your head is placed artistically for how it looks versus where your head is placed because of where it belongs in space relative to the rest of your body. It's new, it's very real, and it's something that you can feel. You don't have to live in it to know where to go to reach for it when you need it. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Evaluate points of view. And then add up 2 and 2 to allow for karma to come towards you. Direct your thinking, because if you don't, somebody else is. Geist.